scleral wound. And about the iris, meaning what we have been doing is iris which is exposed for less than 24 hours, it doesn't look necrotic, could be repositioned. However, it's been more than that or it looks necrotic, then ideally we could abscise. Otherwise, there's always this risk of infection. After the anterior chamber is formed, the corneal wound is restored. Patients who have ruptured lens capsule, the lens could be handled in the same sitting, especially in children, provided the visibility to the corneal wound is good. And IOL insertion again at the same sitting is controversial because the IOL power, we don't know which is the right one. We usually take the power from the other eye. We don't know about the capsular support and plus the risk of infection. This was a young child who came with this ruptured lens, and there was vitreous in the corneal wound. Again, the wound was a very small one, not a very big one. We could manage with just, fortunately, the iris is not prolapsed here. So after placing the single suture on the corneal wound, a bimanual aspiration was done of the lens matter. I was not too sure of the posterior capsular support, so did not implant IOL at that time. This is how he looked first day after surgery. Even here I can't make out the posterior capsule in the center. Then after a while, say a month down, we could make out the posterior capsule here, but couldn't make out inferiorly. Here there was a through and through tear. The form, whatever had, it was a broomstick injury. So the broomstick had penetrated the cornea, the iris and the lens and the posterior capsule there. The iris was adherent to the posterior capsule inferiorly. So at a later date, I think 4 or 5 months later, we actually had to lift up the iris inferiorly where it was stuck, and then there was a small support of posterior capsule and we could place the lens in the sulcus. This was another child with a self-sealing corneal wound here. It's a small self-sealing corneal wound which is ruptured. This was a knife injury, or I don't know what it was, knife or pin, something had gone in, and a small penetrating injury which had ruptured the lens also. So here the cornea was not sutured, just the lens matter was aspirated, and the IOL was placed in the primary sitting. Sometimes you could have trauma resulting in subluxations like this, which could be managed with lensectomy, vitrectomy, and scleral fixated IOL, now the more recent glued IOLs. Topically, we could give fortified antibiotics immediately post-surgery to prevent endophthalmitis. Steroids are used judiciously, and if the wound is infected at the time of the repair itself, the cultures could be taken to know what is the infecting organism. Visual rehabilitation usually is 3 months post-op. Once the sutures start becoming loose, or if they don't loosen up, they are removed only after 3 months. Glasses are prescribed, RGP lenses can be prescribed. If the wound has really caused a lot of scarring, then keratoplasty would be required. This was an interesting case. He had come with a honey bee sting injury. He came to us almost 10 days after the bee sting injury. He came with a dense corneal infiltrate. We did corneal scraping. Corneal scraping did not reveal any microorganisms, so he was on fortified antibiotics. We didn't get organisms. We added the steroids. The steroids also, the edema started clearing, but not the way we would want it to be. We went ahead and did the honey bee sting removal, because at that time I was not too sure whether to remove it or to keep it, because some say if you remove it, at that time you release some venom which could again initiate a lot of toxic reaction. Honey bee sting venom is toxic, antigenic. It can cause corneal edema, sterile infiltration, uveitis, iris atrophy, cataract, subluxation. The venom can dissolve the zonules, can cause toxic trabeculitis, toxic optic neuropathy. So this is how the patient looked 3 months post-procedure. There was corneal scarring.
Please sum up.
Yeah, that's that then. Thank you.
I was asking Dr. Sanjeev Mohan about the corneal glue. How many cases you have experience of the corneal fibrin glue in the corneal injuries?
In corneal injuries, only one patient I put fibrin glue, but pterygium we are using it now more often to stick the conjunctival autograft.
Pterygium we are already doing.
Injuries in private practice, actually you don't see also that many.
You use glue without suturing or with suture?
No, those 4 sutures I placed because it was an irregular tear, and after that I was not sure that it's really self-sealing, or meaning it was still leaky at some point. So I put the glue just to make sure the wound is secure.
Anybody in the audience has got experience with the fibrin glue for corneal injuries? Dr. Quresh, wake up. I think you are sleeping.
We won't give you 1 point. Huh?
This is Dr. Cyrus Mehta. He will be speaking on cataract surgery in grossly subluxated lens. Dr. Cyrus Mehta, please.
Anyway, this person actually had it's a Marfan syndrome case. You can see that, but it's also sustained a trauma, and you can see the synechia there. That's why I thought I'll show it. I really don't see any trauma cases in private practice. It's just mainly cataracts, glaucoma, and LASIK. But since Dr. Natarajan has so kindly called me here to give a talk, so here I am. So you just sweep off the synechia. It gives you good access to the lens. And the idea is you make the smallest rhexis possible. The idea of making a very small rhexis is that so that you can hook the capsular bag up with your regular iris hooks. You can get capsule hooks as well, which are bent a little differently, but you can't keep everything in every operation theater. So iris hooks is what I've got, and iris hooks is what I'll use. So you make a nice small little rhexis, and you can give a little counter pressure to the lens when you're passing by the weak zonular area. I think a lot of us will probably get this kind of a case now and then to do. So an option is to do an ICC. That's what we used to do in the old days, and then put in an anterior chamber lens, which sometimes did well and sometimes didn't. Most of the time it didn't do well. So I prefer to use this technique, and this is what I do nowadays whenever I get a Marfan's like this. 2 stab incisions through the limbus, and you hook the bag up. Now we always feel the first time you use iris hooks that any moment the bag is going to go, but surprisingly it's quite strong. If your rhexis is curvilinear, it doesn't have to be circular, as long as it's curvilinear and it's well constructed, you won't have any problem. And these patients come fairly early for surgery because they have poor vision anyway. They don't wait for old age to get dense cataracts. So you can just do an irrigation aspiration with your phaco tip or even with an INA, and there it is, it's gone. So you can see the bag stays very nicely there with the hooks. Another alternative is to glue the IOL in, but then what do we do with the bag? The idea is to keep the bag there as a barrier to prostaglandins going behind and CME and all the other stuff. Now you put in a capsular tension ring and try to support the area of maximum subluxation with the largest part of the ring. So you can either inject it this way or that way, it doesn't make a difference. But when you inject a capsular tension ring, try to do it as smoothly as possible and make sure there's viscoelastic in the bag. Because if you snag an edge, and if your capsular tension ring is really not the best quality, then it might tear the bag, and it has happened, and then the ring and bag and everything will fall inside. So this is the lens I use most of the time. I used to suture in a 3-piece lens, but I don't have any 3-piece lenses anymore, and fewer and fewer companies are making them now. So this is my standard Rayner C-Flex lens that I use for most cases. You can use a 10-0 or a 9-0 Prolene like this. I was using a 10-0, now I'm using a 9-0 Prolene. Because I think that suture is a little stronger and will probably last longer. So you pull the suture out through the barrel of the injector. This way you don't have to incise the eye open and put stitches and all that. I think this is much easier. Just pass it under the repositor so that you don't damage the corneal tunnel, and go through the fornix of the bag. Just go through midpoint of fornix, and the needle is surprisingly stiff. Looking at it, it doesn't look so, but the needle is pretty stiff and usually comes out about 3 to 4 millimeters behind. And that's where you want it to be. You don't want the needle coming out a millimeter behind the limbus, because if it comes out a millimeter behind the limbus, then your lens, when you suture it, will be tenting the iris upwards, and that's very obvious next day on the slit lamp. So this is the easier way. You just pass it through the fornix of the bag, about 3-4 millimeters behind, and inject the lens in behind it. So now you've got the leading haptic connected to a suture which has come out through your sclera and a conjunctival peritomy. Now you pass the needle in a Z fashion once and then again twice. So that creates a loop there, and you can adjust the tension, etc. So that was one pass, and then this is pass 2. So this avoids the need for suturing in Sioni segments and all that, which is pretty challenging and it's difficult. And then you just bury the knot in that same nick and put the conjunctiva back with one suture or with fibrin glue. And even if you don't put it back, it'll go back there anyway eventually. It's just like 2 millimeters of conjunctiva. So I think this is a nice, easy way to manage a subluxated lens. Of course, if it's grossly dislocated, this won't work and you'll have to suture it both ends. And I've done that as well. But that's another talk for another time. So thank you.
Thank you for saving some of our time.
Any questions? Can take some questions.
The trauma segment underlined in this talk. There is big question mark on many faces.
Good afternoon, everyone. I thank Dr. Natarajan and his team for calling me here. You just speak a few things on what all can we see on UBM in trauma. UBM itself should be combined with the 20 megahertz imaging to get a complete view of the anterior segment. Of course, the posterior segment evaluation with B-scan is equally important, but in certain cases, anterior does help. Just few words on what is UBM. We use a very high frequency probe, around 35 to 50 megahertz probe, and it has a resolution of around 40 microns and a depth of penetration of 4 millimeters. That is what is the restricting point. It doesn't go beyond the posterior capsule, but it helps to see the anterior image very well. This is how we see the anatomy. The cornea, the entire anterior chamber is seen very well. That's the anterior capsule, posterior capsule, the ciliary body over here, the angle, and that's the IOL. You can see the entire the optic and the haptic very well. But that's all about that sees. It doesn't see beyond the anterior vitreous cavity. Now, this in the angle region is actually the most important part to be evaluated here. You can see that it gives you almost the same picture as a cut section of the eye at the angle. You can see the scleral spur, the shawl base line, and the angle can be evaluated very well. The ciliary processes are seen here. Now, this is the zonules. From the ciliary processes to the capsule, we can see the zonules very well, and you can see the effect of trauma on the zonules. If we cut through the ciliary process area, each and every ciliary process can be seen, and the direction of the ciliary processes can be evaluated very well. This is useful in cases of glaucoma, not really so much in trauma, but this is what is possible to see. Now, when we come to trauma itself, what are the lesions that's possible to be seen on UBM? Most important thing is the angle recession. Of course, this comes at the later stage in trauma. In the acute stage, we see cyclodialysis cleft, zonular tear, Watt clock hours, posterior capsular integrity. Iridodialysis, of course, is a slit lamp diagnosis. You don't need a UBM for that. IOFBs, if positioned in a very odd place. Nodular scleritis sometimes, yes. Now, we start off with this nodular scleritis. I had this female who stays in a village and had a small nodule over the sclera. She's been taking steroid for maybe a year or so along, and came to probably one of our general hospitals. Said, let's just evaluate if there's anything else. We saw this nodular mass lesion over the sclera. You can see a bright spot with some sort of a shadowing out here. Then I changed the gain settings within the machine. You can see that it's a small IOFB, which is measuring around 240 to 250 microns. Then we asked the history. She said that she stays in a village where Naxalites are there and they keep on getting blasted very often here and there. Somebody gets injured in the hand, leg, everywhere. So everybody has some foreign body somewhere or other. She got it on the sclera. Now you remove, unless this thing comes out, this nodular scleritis is not going to go with steroids. Okay. IOL, as I told you, we can see the